Okay, so Bill and Bob got their little sober club started in Akron in New York. For all of 1936, Bill and Bob keep chugging along, helping drunks and attending Oxford group meetings. Hank Parkhurst, the guy Bill sobers up in New York, starts a business called Honor Dealers that sells stuff for gas stations like oil filters and windshield cleaner and shop rags and stuff like that. They do business mainly in New Jersey, and Hank uses the business to give newly sober people a job. Bill and Hank are going to be doing a lot of stuff together moving forward. They're going to be like best buds. In Akron, the Oxford groupers were willing to work with anyone, including drunks. In the Midwest, there's a strong belief that you are no better than anyone else, and that was true with the Akron Oxford group. In New York, however, the Oxford group was very elitist, focusing only on the well-to-do and highly educated. They believed the only people worthy of their message were those they deemed smart enough to receive it. Remember, these are the days of eugenics, okay? Where people believed that they were genetically superior to other people, and this was especially true in the higher classes on the East Coast. As Bill started bringing more and more drunks with him to the meetings, the Oxford groupers didn't like it. Hey, Bill, why don't you focus more on your Wall Street friends rather than these lower types? But Bill kept bringing in the drunks, and the New York Oxford groupers started to become hostile towards them. So, Bill began to hold separate alcoholics-only meetings at his home in Brooklyn. For all of 1936 and going into 1937, everything seemed fine. Bill and his band of drunks would attend the Oxford group meeting on Saturday, then meet at his house for an alcoholics-only meeting on Sunday. But going into 1937, Bill's alcoholics-only meeting started to cause a rift with the New York Oxford group, and they started a revolt against him. Soon, Bill found that Calvary church leaders ordered that no one from their mission was allowed to attend Bill's private meeting, or even visit the Wilsons' house for any matter, period. Then, groups within Calvary Church began rumors that Bill was not maximum, meaning he wasn't a real Oxford group believer, just a taker and a sinner. Then, one Sunday, an associate pastor at Calvary Church gave a damning sermon about the divergent work of a secret ashamed group within the congregation. That secret ashamed group was Bill and his drunks, and everyone knew it. So, in the summer of 1937, the New York Drunk Squad said, "You know what? Screw you guys. We're out." And the New York drunks broke with the Oxford group. Now, sometime just before this break, Bill got a job with a company called Quah & Foley, a venture capital firm. His job there was to investigate different business opportunities in different cities in America. He spends most of 1937 traveling around the country. But Bill realizes, as he's traveling around, that being autonomous from the Oxford group is a problem for his sobriety movement. All those elite connections he had were gone. So Bill has a threefold vision. 1, a chain of nationwide alcoholic hospitals. 2, paid missionaries to establish meetings all across the country. And 3, a book that would explain their methods to provide continuity to this movement. In October of 1937, Bill loses his job at Quah & Foley. About a week later, he takes a trip out to Akron with Lois and a few New York drunks to visit Dr. Bob and Ann. Now, contrary to AA lore, there were never 6 steps in the Oxford group. There were never any steps, period, before the printing of the Big Book. The idea of the 6 steps comes from recorded talks Bill gave in the 50s and 60s, where he said, "Bob and I agreed that this word-of-mouth program could be boiled down to 6 essential propositions. Those were, 1, we had admitted we were powerless over alcohol. 2, had gotten honest with ourselves. 3, gotten honest with other people about our defects. 4, made restitution to those we had harmed. 5, tried to carry this message to other alcoholics. And 6, prayed to whatever God we thought there was." And then the famous nose count. Late one afternoon, Bill and Bob were sitting in Dr. Bob's living room comparing stories of their successes and failures in sobering up drunks. As the stories multiplied, they began to realize that they were more successful than they thought. It was at that moment when Bill and Bob started counting noses and realized there was something like 40 people that maintained enough sobriety to be considered a success. Hey, they thought, we really got something here. If 40 people could recover from the ravages of alcoholism, why not 400 or 4,000 or even 40,000. Why, we only have to sober up all these boys and girls and they would revolutionize society. But, Bill thought, can we really expect every drunk in the world would be willing to travel to Akron or New York to be schooled in our solution? And even if they could, how would they learn that this solution was available to them? This is when Bill said he laid out his grand plan: the hospitals, the paid missionaries, and the book. When Bill told Dr. Bob about his plans, Bill said Bob liked the book idea, but had reservations about the hospitals and missionaries. So Dr. Bob suggested they consult with the others in the group. Dr. Bob called a special meeting of the Akron drunks to hear Bill's plan. In that meeting, Bill paced the room, flailing his arms while talking. He pounded the table to drive home certain facts. And he went through cigarette after cigarette debating the Akron drunks on the need for hospitals and missionaries and a book. The conservative Akronites were not as enthusiastic as Bill, and proposing a split from the Oxford group was heresy to them. In the end, though, a couple of votes were taken, and by only a 1 or 2 vote margin, Bill was given permission to start investigating the funding for a hospital. But no begging any of the Akron rich people for money. The Akron boys didn't want to be seen with their hand out. All that money would have to come from the rich hoity-toities in New York. That was all Bill needed. His plans for the hospitals and the missionaries and the book got moving. When Bill gets back to New York, he launches on a course of rigorous action. Him and Hank Parkhurst, Bill's bestie, immediately start hounding the money class of New York. Probably $1 billion total had been spent in trying to make prohibition happen, so they should at least be able to find a measly $1 million for their hospitals thing, right? Well, everywhere Bill and Hank went, their pitch was met with the same answer. Why would anyone bother saving a bunch of people who are responsible for their own misery? Weeks and weeks of cold calls, canvassing, and of course, failure. Bill's dream of easy money evaporated. Him and Hank couldn't even find a dime. All this failure gave Bill a tummy ache, a bad one. So bad, in fact, that he thought it might be an ulcer. On October 25th, 1937, Bill goes to get some help for his imaginary ulcer by visiting his brother-in-law, who was a doctor, Dr. Leonard Strong. There, in his brother-in-law's office, Bill goes through his poor me's about how the stingy wealthy class won't give him the time of day for his cure for drunks. But Dr. Leonard Strong found the idea compelling and walked Bill over to another doctor in the building called Dr. Wynne, who used to be the health commissioner of New York. Dr. Wynne told Bill, "Hey, you should get in touch with the Rockefeller Foundation. Nay, scratch that, with John D. Rockefeller Jr. himself. This is the type of thing he might get behind." The Rockefellers were a notoriously religious family and loathed the consumption of alcohol in all forms. They were the driving force behind the 18th Amendment and its repeal. When Bill heard this, he was like, "Yeah, right, John D. Rockefeller Jr., you might as well have said the Prince of Wales." However, Bill's brother-in-law thinks he's got an in. He had a Bible study teacher in his younger days named Willard Richardson, who he became friends with. He remembers reading that Willard worked for John D. Jr., and he might still be there. What if they give the Rockefeller offices a call and see if he's in? Bill was like, yeah, do that. Sure enough, they call over and Willard Richardson is in the office. He takes Leonard's call and is happy to be able to speak to him again. "Leonard, where have you been all this time? I have missed you." Now, Willard Richardson didn't just work for the Rockefellers. He was directly responsible for John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s personal donations. He was the gatekeeper to the very tippy top, and he was intrigued by Bill's idea and asked Leonard to send him over. The next day, October 26, 1937, Bill Wilson found himself stepping into room 5600 Rockefeller Center, at that time one of the most famous addresses in the world and the seat of the Rockefeller Empire. Bill gives Willard his story, his hopeless state as an alcoholic, his many attempts to get sober, alcoholism as a disease, his white light experience, and the spiritual process which serves as a permanent cure. Willard was impressed. He found Bill so sincere and so convincing. And of course, Bill gives Willard the spiel about the hospitals and the missionaries and the money they need to get it all started. Willard asked Bill if he could share his story with a few of Mr. Rockefeller's friends and get back to him shortly. Bill agreed. Absolutely. Bill said that he was so elated, his imaginary ulcer attack instantly disappeared. A few weeks later, Willard writes Dr. Leonard Strong and informs him that he brought Bill's proposal to Mr. Rockefeller's friends, and even though they were very much intrigued by Bill's religious experience, they felt that any attempt to professionalize this movement would be undesirable. However, if Bill and Dr. Leonard Strong would be willing to meet for lunch again, he would very much appreciate it. So, Bill, this time with Dr. Leonard Strong, go to visit Willard again, and Bill lays it on Strong. We need to save these drunks. Millions were spent on prohibition and it only made it worse. How can we just let these poor people die in the streets when we have a proven cure to help them? Willard, again intrigued at Bill's sincerity, says, all right, wouldn't you like to have lunch with my friends and tell them what you told me? It was music to Bill's ears. Now, the lunch was changed to a dinner, the famous A.A. Rockefeller dinner. It was held on Monday, December 16, 1936, at 5600 Rockefeller Center. Bill brought Dr. Bob in from Akron, along with Dr. Silkworth from Towns Hospital, his brother-in-law Dr. Leonard Strong, and 5 other sober drunks. Willard Richardson invited 3 men on his side, Leroy Chipman, Frank Amos, and Albert Scott. Albert Scott is a very important figure. He wrote the book Towards Liquor Control, which the Rockefellers used to steer them out of prohibition by encouraging states to enact blue laws. Laws like last call, the state liquor agencies, and days when you can and can't buy liquor. The pitch starts off with each drunk giving their stories and the cure which led to their recovery, like those 6 steps that we know never really existed. Then Dr. Silkworth weighed in, giving the medical description of the alcoholic. How in all his years of treating alcoholics, he has come to view alcoholism as a disease, and it can't be cured by medicine or psychiatry. Whatever Bill and Bob was doing seemed to be the only thing working. Then Bill goes in for the pitch. We need to build a chain of hospitals, paid missionaries, and a book about our cure, and we need maybe a couple $1,000,000 to do it, so what do you say, huh? And it was Albert Scott, not John D. Rockefeller Jr., who broke the news to Bill. Gentlemen, I am deeply moved by what I have heard. What you have described is nothing less than first-century Christianity in its most beautiful form. Up to this point, your work has been of tremendous goodwill only, with one person carrying the message to the next. Won't money completely ruin that? Bill answered, quite frankly, our movement will be ruined if we don't get these things. The 4 Rockefeller guys look at each other, and they're like, well, they do need some money. So Bill switches to plan B, which was probably the plan all along. Okay, so what if instead of a bunch of money for a bunch of hospitals, what about just a little bit of money for one hospital in Akron that Dr. Bob could operate? Just give us money for this one hospital and you will see this thing take off. The Rockefeller men think about it, look at each other, then reply, okay, we're open to investigating the idea of opening one hospital in Akron. Again, it was music to Bill's ears. And that was the end of the dinner, except for the curveball the Rockefeller guys threw at Bill, but that guy got sober and all is good. In February of 1938, the Rockefeller men send out Frank Amos to investigate Akron, Dr. Bob, and to see what sites are available for a hospital. Dr. Bob asked that Frank Amos do all of his work undercover and not to let any of the Akron boys know that he is with the Rockefellers. Frank talks with the sobered-up Akron drunks, along with some judges and doctors and lawyers and other community people. All reports of Dr. Bob and his work in Akron were glowing, and along with these glowing reviews came a common plea. Dr. Bob is doing so much work with these alcoholics for free to the detriment of his own practice. Somebody should really help him out. This plea was passed to Frank Amos by multiple drunks in Akron, having no idea that Frank was working for the Rockefellers. So Frank submits his glowing report about Akron to Willard Richardson and offered 3 suggestions for moving forward. 1, a small hospital of 30 to 50 beds, costing anywhere between $75,000 to $100,000 to purchase, furnish, and staff. Or 2, continue to use Akron City Hospital to sober up drunks at costing only $8 per day to do so, but purchase a smaller home with nice surroundings to accommodate 10 or 12 people to recuperate after leaving the hospital. About $30,000 would be needed for that. And then, most importantly, number 3, create a small committee to provide, on a confidential basis, $5,000 per year to Dr. Bob, paid out on a monthly basis over 2 years to make up for the loss of his practice, pay the money owed on his house, hire a secretary, and get his practice up and running again. Of all the suggestions, Frank Amos highly emphasized number 3. Frank really liked Dr. Bob and wanted to help him out. He stressed, whatever we do, we got to get old John Jr. to help this guy out. But Willard Richardson knew something that everyone else didn't. He knew that the Rockefellers had a rule when it came to donating money, and that rule was the Rockefellers do not take on the entire financial responsibility of an enterprise, or even 50% of it. The majority of the enterprise's funding has to be covered by another source. Rockefeller money is only to be supplemental. Willard knew that Bill's request for funding for an entire hospital system would have never been fulfilled by John D. Rockefeller Jr. this whole time. But Willard loved his spiritual approach to curing alcoholism. It could be why he kept telling Bill over and over again not to professionalize this thing, because he knew he couldn't get the money out of the Rockefellers. But Frank's plea to help out Dr. Bob must have tugged at his heartstrings. So he made a request to John D. Rockefeller Jr. for at least 1 year's funding of $5,000 to be given to Dr. Bob so he can continue his practice in helping drunks. On March 17, 1938, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave Willard his response. The letter. I have read all the stuff you have sent me regarding the drink addicts with care. What these guys have accomplished is truly miraculous. I can understand why you, Willard, are interested in their work. But as much as I would like to contribute $5,000 a year for 2 years to this cause, you know the rules. That would be me taking on the entire financial responsibility of their enterprise, and I can't do that. What I am willing to do, though, because it matters to you so much, is I can make a $5,000 donation to the Riverside Baptist Church. And I'll put a note on that donation that it is for you to use for your alcoholics thing, and you guys can make that last 1 year or 5 years or whatever. And I will do that for you so long as you don't come to me for any more money regarding this alcoholics thing. Okay? Thanks, bro. Signed, John D. Rockefeller Jr. And that was that. That was all John D. Jr. was willing to give. And all of Bill's dreams of hospitals and paid missionaries, that went out the window. Now what?